Sup, Starshines? Sylvia-Moonbeam here. It's a hot day at the end of May in 2020, so let's sashay into some robes. Robots. Today I'm looking at Transformers, Titans Return, Autobot Telsor, and Brainstorm. In case you're wondering why I'm reviewing a figure from 2015, it's because I finally got my hands on one. This is actually a Australian release because in Australia apparently in a lot of countries in like the Oceania Pacific, the West Pacific, this is actually like mass released. This was a shelf warmer in some countries. In the US, however, it was a short pack, so I wasn't able to get my hands on one when it was initially released. But now that it's been a few years, and the fact that this thing only costs like 25 bucks, so barely more than the initial price, this is going to be a little bit different because Brainstorm isn't a very well-known character, isn't very widely shown in media. There's literally an episode of Transformers named Brainstorm, and there's actually a G.I. Joe character who has no relation, despite the fact that there are canon G.I. Joe Transformers crossovers. Brainstorm has basically only ever appeared in Generation 1, and by extension, the IDW Comics version of Generation 1. So we're going to get to go over that a little bit in the video. Let's get started. So Brainstorm and Telsor are just one name for this character. Specifically in the IDW comics, this is canon in the comics that Genetus is actually the character's name, but Brainstorm is just a nickname. Similar to how in the Transformers live-action movies, the character Wheeljack has the nickname of Q. By extension, he was also known as Charon for a 3-pack that had a repaint of Windblade and Ultra Magnus. But technically that wasn't a canon name, it was more just a name they had to give him temporarily. However, his canon name since Gen 1 has been Brainstorm. Brainstorm was one of the original headmasters, but what's really interesting about Brainstorm is that his partner's name has changed as well. You can see currently it is Telsor. However, Telsor wasn't the original name of the character. Originally the name was Arcana, as in, like, this Arcana. As I kind of mentioned already, similar to Q/Wheeljack, as well as modern interpretations of Wheeljack nowadays, Brainstorm is essentially kind of a mad scientist transformer. He creates all these different technological inventions to help out the Autobots, and his partner, regardless of whether they are Telsor or Arcana, help increase their powers of mental genuineness. You know what I mean. What's really cool about this figure too is it's actually an extensive remold of Blur, so that'll be fun to compare them in my comparison section. Out of the package, Brainstorm is a really cool figure, though I will admit, I've done this before. If you watched my Blur video, this figure has near identical engineering with only some minor changes. The shoulders, for example, have been swapped out with ones that feature wings. The shield component / sled has been increased and given some blasters, but is functionally the same and even attaches the same way. Heck, the legs are identical, the torso is identical, even the pistols are identical. The only real difference is, for example, the wrist kibble, the heads, the shields, the shoulders, and the color scheme. That being said, Brainstorm is still really cool. This bright, like, teal, it's a good color. You don't see Transformers in this color very often. and I really like that. And while the light gray and medium gray are a little bland, I mean, it's okay. It's still a good color, and honestly, it's kind of nice considering that a lot of other robots have white or black or are all gray, all one color of gray. This has two different colors of gray, and it honestly makes for a pretty good figure. Just once again to bring in blur, you can see they scale very well. After all, they are essentially the same figure. The main differences are that for Blur's design, the Autobot symbol is on his shield, but for Brainstorm's, his Autobot symbol is actually here on his chest. It's a little hard to see, but it's in his stomach, surprisingly. What's really interesting is that the collector card shows the Autobot symbol as being just above his window on his chest, as you can see. So it's interesting that they didn't do a little print where it's right there. Brainstorm and Telsor do come with a collector card, like I mentioned. You can see, just like I kind of mentioned with the bio, Brainstorm's strongest stat is intellect, and adding on Telsor adds even more intellect. As to be expected, not a lot of strength added, not a lot of firepower added. However, the speed increase of 2 is interesting, though my best guess would be that's maybe processing power. Similar to Blur, the shield can also be detached and added onto the back to make a bit of a backpack. But at least for Blur, it folds up pretty well. However, for Brainstorm, when his attaches to the back, it gives us a larger backpack, significantly larger. In fact, the guns go down pretty far. However, despite this fairly large backpack, this is actually Gen 1 accurate. For that, we need to bring in Gen 1 Brainstorm. Believe it or not, this is one of the few Gen 1 figures I have. The other Generation 1 figures I have are Optimus Prime, as you may have seen in a previous video. And I also have a Gen 1 Soundwave. But take a look. This is a pretty decent update. Obviously, you can tell that they gave him the same pistol as Blur, because, well, it kind of looks like Brainstorm's original pistols. However, Brainstorm's nose cone attaches to his back, just in the opposite direction. And with Gen 1 Brainstorm, the pistols were stored on the nose cone, like so. So having the backpack like this is Gen 1 accurate, and that's kind of cool. Albeit, I'll admit, I like this figure for the nostalgia factor, and this figure because it's a good figure. Again, Blur is one of my favorite figures, so the fact that I have a Blur that flies is really cool. You may notice that unlike this version of Brainstorm that only has the window, the original Gen 1 version did have that little panel for viewing tech specs. And so I'm actually interested in comparing this tech specs with these. So for here we only have 3 stats. We have speed, strength, and intelligence. And notice that speed is actually higher than intelligence, with strength fairly low down. You can compare that to the character changes from the updated card. Again, Brainstorm has always been about mental strength, and because, you know, he turns into a jet, he's going to be fast. He's not a physical fighter. In addition to his moldmate Blur, we of course also have fellow Autobot scientist Chrome Dome, another one of my favorite characters and favorite figures. We also have Six Gun, from Siege. And of course, once again, with Gen 1 Brainstorm. And I want to take a quick look at Telsor. As you can see, same teal and gray as Brainstorm with a little bit of orange on the face. I believe this is a remold of Blur's Titan Master. Not surprising if it is, but you can see they're the same size. However, I also want to compare it to G1 counterpart Arcana. You can definitely see significantly smaller. However, let's be honest, the face mold is definitely better nowadays. Also, just for fun, I want to compare it to a Creon. Here is Nemesis Prime. Compared to a Bot Shots, here is Bot Shots Shockwave. And comparing it to a Prime Master, here is, I believe, Sub-Marauder, who is the Prime Master for fellow mad scientist, Alchemist Prime, who I feel like is basically the same figure, just with reversed colors. Here is Brainstorm in kind of a Cybertronian jet fighter mode. Really cool, though as to be expected, it is basically the exact same transformation as Blur, just with some minor differences. The shield piece being a little bit bigger, of course. These little thruster pieces, where the shoulder, where the wrists are a little bit smaller. The fin is a little bit different, and of course, there are no wings on Blur's side. One interesting difference is with Blur, his pistol can plug into the underside of his nose cone. However, because of how Brainstorm's is designed, you can't really do that. I mean, you could, but that would result in one of two things. Either you'd have a Brainstorm with a third little gun, and because how much the gun sticks out, it rolls, but I'm a little worried about that clearance. Or potentially you could do what's shown on the instructions. That was really hard to pull out, where they literally show you in the instructions that you can just plug it in to the shoulder over here. Now, I have not plugged it in, so my figure is actually a little... Yeah, I can't even get it in there. That's actually surprisingly tight. It was hard, as you may have seen, it was hard to get it out of there too. Though, on the back of the instructions, the sled mode, they show it attaching there. So, I think it makes the most sense because, again, it's basically just Blur to have it like that. You can see they're about the same size. It looks really good. Also, of course, once again, compare it to fellow scientist Chrome Dome. Six gun. And of course, Generation 1 Brainstorm. Now, I'm not sure if it's audible. My neighbors on the other side of the wall are playing music, so if you hear that in the background, that's them. Something really interesting about this figure is, unlike the original Brainstorm, who had these panels these wings that flipped down that were on his shoulders, those don't flip up on the Brainstorm mode. These are part of the mold. And so they actually, similar to the Blur mold, flip out a third fin. That was actually a really creative workaround for the design. You can see in jet mode, they're about the same size. Again, the cockpit, though, is a little bit smaller for Brainstorms because there's more emphasis on proportion in later generations. This has been Titan's Return Brainstorm with Telsor. It's actually a really cool figure. Like I mentioned before, Blur is one of my favorite figures, and they literally just took Blur and gave him a cooler shield and wings. So, while this in particular is not one of my favorite figures, because it's my second time playing with it, essentially, this is really cool, and it's definitely one of my favorites, being basically just one of my favorite figures, but different. I've been Sylvia-Moonbeam. Until next time, please leave a lunar laser like below and consider giving me a starshine subscribe and hitting that moonbeam bell if you want to see more content like this. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace. It's a hot day in the land. I got my tongue twisted on some words. This is an Australian figure. That's right, they mass released this in like Australia. And they didn't release a bunch of these in the US. I can do this! Yay!